Thank you very much for attending. And if you would like the slides, they are available in the handout section of the webinar. My name is Joe McCoy, and today we are continuing our Risk and Compliance series, which is a bi-weekly webinar where we talk about different HIPAA topics to keep you up to date. And so today's topic is going to be a deep dive into the timeline of what happens after you've been successfully breached. After our last webinar, we talked about the CPGs and all these new cybersecurity standards that were developed in response to an increase in cyber attacks, especially successful cyber attacks. So today we want to talk about what does it really look like once you've been successfully breached. We're going to take this from the perspective of the worst case scenario, but a lot of times the worst case scenario is the most common case scenario. So we want to make sure that we are prepared for what's going to happen in the worst case event. And again, what we've talked about with cybersecurity is that it doesn't matter how good your security is, it is still possible to be breached. And then we're going to stress the importance of having a strong security incident plan. The security incident plan can be your get out of jail free card that's used metaphorically to make sure that any damages that are caused from a successful breach are mitigated to minimum possible, and it can be the difference between you saving your practice and not. So, like we've said, breaches are coming. Breaches are inevitable. Real quick, Change Healthcare, AT&T, many organizations every day, bigger than healthcare, ones that spend millions and millions of dollars on cybersecurity, they get hacked. So you are also able to be hacked. And being proactive and having a security incident plan can be the difference. And that's what we want to really go over today. Real quick for some numbers to kind of illustrate some of the points I'm making. This is two different graphs that go over what are the reasons why people are being hacked. And back previous to this year, it was about half were hacking or IT malfunctions. But now, just in the year 2024, this is a bit older, just in January and February, it was 75% of all cyber attacks or all major breaches were done by any kind of hacking or IT deficiencies. So it's really becoming the most common way people are being breached. And one more little number to kind of throw at you to illustrate this point is that last year in 2023, there were 135 million patient records breached. And this year we are projected to hit over, I think well over 200 million. So the threats are out there. So what happens when a successful cyber attack happens? Well, picture this. You come into the office, it's 8:30 in the morning, and you're trying to type in your password and you can't log in. It keeps saying that it's an incorrect password, that there's an error message, you can't get in. Maybe you try to log into your EMR and you can't log into that. And it's, you're about to see patients in 30 minutes. Well, what do? You don't know what's going on. You don't know what's going on. So what you have to do is you got to call your IT person immediately. They need to come in and figure out, have you been hacked? Was there just an error? Maybe there's a Windows update that glitched, something. We need to know what's going on. And we need to be able to make sure that we have our backups. This is where backups come into a huge role, is that, instead of spending potentially days having your IT person sift through all the myriad of different options that there are and figure out what's going on, you need to be able to get back to work immediately and have your backups up and deployed. One of the issues, and this is what hits the headlines a lot of the time, is ransomware. We all hear about, ransom in other places, but ransom in cybercrime is very, very prevalent. And so they will steal your data and then they will say, pay us an X amount of money very soon, or you're never going to see your files again. And so are you prepared to deal with that? And some questions that always arise is, should you pay them? Paying them is kind of controversial when it comes to the government, because who are you paying? Are these just cyber criminals just trying to, make a quick buck and steal your records? Or are these terrorists that are using this information for very nefarious reasons? And I don't think anybody here or anybody listening to this wants to be caught funding terrorism, especially with medical records, because medical records are used for a myriad of reasons to make lots of money, among other things. Think about, if you're a DNA company, I mean, you don't want to give terrorists, loads of databases about DNA. So should you pay them? That's a good question. And then the other question is, can you pay them? Well, do you have access to Bitcoin? That's going to be a major, most common way that they're going to ask for money. They're not going to ask you to wire US dollars through the banking system for you to get your records back. So do you have access to Bitcoin? Do you even have any kind of reserve fund? If you had to pull out $10,000 to get your medical records back so that you could open and continue business as usual, are you even able to do that? So these are questions that we want to ask. And this is where having those proper backups that we talked about earlier is a huge benefit, because if you have those good backups, then the leverage from the cyber criminals goes down immensely. You can get back to business and you can just proceed as a major breach instead of having to deal with negotiations about paying them and other things. So this is really where your backups are saving grace. So what if you don't have backups or they've been locked up as well? One of the things that's really nefarious about all of this is that these cyber criminals a lot of times will sit on your network for months before they really make their big attack. They can sit on your network, they can watch how you conduct business, how you do your backups, email, all these things. They have your business down to a timeline. They know exactly when you do things, how you do things, and this is where they can really do some serious damage. Again, we're talking worst case scenarios here. So they know how you do your backups. So when they are ready to attack and they find their time, they will lock up your backups. So even if you have good backups, if it's not properly segmented, or if you don't have a physical on site like a hard drive or anything like that, and everything is just backed up to the cloud or something like that, then you could be checkmated, essentially is how it goes. And they may say things like send payment within 1 hour or rate doubles. Now, when we talk about the question, should you pay them? Well, if they have you checkmated and you need those records back, you probably need to pay them. Again, this is a case-by-case scenario. This is something you want to discuss with your IT person. Make sure you've exhausted all possibilities of actions that you could take. And if your IT person says, hey, they got you and you need to pay them because there's nothing you can do, then that's when it's acceptable to make those payments. Because again, can you afford to go days without records? Because before you have to fight back against these cyber criminals to get your backups up and running so that you can continue operations as usual, this could take days, if not weeks, if not months. So, or maybe the IT person can't even get them back. Maybe you got hacked so bad that you can't even get your records back. So we want to be prepared for these situations because they do happen in the real world. Okay, so you paid the cyber criminals. We're far from over from the whole ordeal, the whole debacle. When we get our records back, we have to assess the integrity of the records, because just because they give them back doesn't mean they didn't doctor them, alter them, only give you a sliver of them. We want to make sure that all of the records are intact. So a lot of this revolves around hiring forensics. Third-party IT forensics can be a very costly process. That's something we'll go over later, especially as we talk about cyber insurance. So we want to make sure that all the records are intact and up to date, because what if they deleted something off a medications list because they're a real sinister group? They want to just cause destruction. They delete medications off a list. They remove diagnoses. Maybe they add diagnoses. These are real issues when we're talking about integrity of these records. The other thing is notification, and this is going to be a recurring theme, is that a major cost of a major breach is notifying all affected parties. And so one of the main ones is the government. CISA, who is essentially the government's IT company, they are responsible for receiving complaints about breaches in anything that is considered critical infrastructure. So that's banking, healthcare, finance, a lot of other industries, military, anything like that. So obviously, if you fall under HIPAA, you fall under CISA because you've got medical records. That's critical information. So you need to notify the government that you've been breached and hacked. So you've reported to the government is now made aware of the situation that's going on. So now they are going to enter the arena. And this is really where the real headache comes in. This is not an easy process. This is not a short process. The government, these agencies, particularly the OCR, the Office for Civil Rights, the OIG, the Office of the Inspector General, they are the judge, the jury, and the executioner. This is not a trial by your peers. And so what we need to do is we need to get our documentation together. We'll go into more as to what kind of documentation is going to be requested so that you know what to have prepared beforehand. You better get your lawyers together because this is going to be a long process, and making sure that we got to make sure everything's done correctly. So your lawyers are going to be very important, and lawyers cost money. And so you're going to have to get your money together because this is not going to be a cheap endeavor. Speaking of finances and notification, this is where things kind of intermingle with each other. So there's a lot of hidden costs that come with breaches that we need to be aware of. And it's also important to know all of these things when we're picking cyber insurance policies, because if cyber insurance policies don't cover something like notification costs, well, you could be out tens of thousands of dollars because they're not going to cover it. Again, we talked about forensics. It can be as little as $5,000. That'd be for a teeny tiny practice with not a lot to do. But for your medium-sized practices to very large practices, we're talking $50,000 to up to $100,000 to have an IT forensics team come in, assess the integrity of the records. They're going to go in and see how the vulnerabilities that these cyber criminals leverage to get into your system. So they are going to be expensive and be doing a lot of work for you. We're probably going to have to increase our cybersecurity budget. Once you get hacked, your chances of getting hacked again go up dramatically. So we now got to increase our security budget and replace equipment, add new things to make us more and more secure. So we've talked about all this. We haven't even gotten to legal. We're talking lawyers that could be $1,000 an hour for, and we'll get into it, a case where the investigation lasts 2.5 years. So you're talking about insane legal costs, potential downtime. Do you get hacked so bad and your backups are gone that you close your office for a week? We had an instance where an office was shut down for 2 weeks because their backups were completely shot and they were unable to see patients. From just the pure monetary standpoint of how much money did you lose by not seeing patients, there are other costs, and something like reputationally. What we've seen is that, even if you've built up 10 to 15 years of goodwill with your patients, if one time you have to notify them that their medical records, their very private, sensitive information has been stolen from you and is now being used on the dark web for Lord knows what reasons by who knows who, they're not going to be very happy about that. So it's very important that your reputation is staying intact and that we're not losing patients on top of all of these other costs. So when we're talking cyber insurance, covering legal fees, covering IT, forensics, and covering notification costs is something we definitely want to look into. Cyber insurance is kind of a wild, wild west market right now. It used to be something that was kind of a throwaway. You just pay, a small amount of money per month, and nothing ever happens, and these insurance companies would rake in. Well, now that technology is crazy, especially during COVID, hacks, cybercrime just exploded. So the prices for these insurance policies went way up. No one really knew how much it was costing these practices or any company, these cyber attacks, how much these were costing. So rates went up, premiums went up. So the more knowledge you have about what needs to be in your cyber insurance policy, the better. So what I want to go into now is we had a client who was successfully breached and received letters from the Office for Civil Rights. And so we redacted the information about the office, but we want to go into and talking about what did it really look like? What kind of information were they asking for? How long did all of this take? So that's what we want to get into now. And this example, what happened was that this went on for 2.5 years. So from the point that they notified the government that they had been successfully breached to when the final resolution was done and this was off their plates was 2.5 years. So like I said, $1,000 an hour attorneys, time spent collecting documentation, updating documentation, getting everything ready. This takes time, which takes away from, your workforce labor to do, your actual operations. And then there's just kind of the mental headache of having the government hover over you for as long as the investigation can take. So these are all things we want to try to avoid, but it's important to know the ramifications for these breaches. And unfortunately, about 60% of small businesses close after a successful cyber attack. So what this looks like is maybe you don't actually close down, but you will either close down or you might have to sell your practice to a hospital. And they come in and scoop you at a low price because you've got all of this, anchoring you down. You've got a major breach upon you. So you're fire selling this practice to them. And no one wants that. People don't want to work for hospitals. So we want to keep the small businesses alive. So we want to make sure that this is really understood to be a real threat out there. So there's two different scenarios for us to go through. So option A, you were proactive and had proper planning for this. You had we'll go over what the different documentation you need in order to be prepared, that you had a good relationship with your IT person and they installed very good, really strong safeguards for you. You did everything right. Well, there are laws and the government doesn't want to spend more time on things than they need to. So if you can prove that you were doing everything you needed to, a law called safe harbor, which is something we try to get all of our clients into, guarantees shorter audits and reduced fines. So more than likely, when you have these safeguards in place, you will not suffer such severe damages that you will have to shut down or have a corrective action plan. Corrective action plan being having the government hover over you even longer than this investigation, because now they are going to make sure that you are implementing, the right safeguards and procedures in place. Again, you just don't want to have them hovering over you as much as possible. So that's best case scenario, is that you mitigate all the damages and you get off scot-free, and you learn your lesson and you move on. But let's say you didn't have proper planning in place, that you have a break and fix relationship with your IT person, your backups are weak, and that your cyber defenses are very low, and you don't even have really any documentation about any of this. You're just kind of, staying and praying, hoping that nothing bad ever happens to you. Well, your reputational damage is going to be bad because you could be shut down and you're not available for weeks. Cybersecurity of your patient records, that is considered patient safety. So patients, this isn't just the government talking. Patients also really like their information to be private. You are holding very sensitive information about them, and they don't want that information getting out. You could be fined. We've seen fines of up to 6 figures for these things, for major breaches, and so that could literally bankrupt some offices or put real hamstrings on your ability to operate. And then you could have to enter a corrective action plan and have further oversight from the government, and spend lots of money implementing your new safeguards, keeping up with them, something that we don't want to do. It's really not a pretty picture. We don't want you to be forced into having to sell your practice. So that's why it is so important to have a proper security incidents plan. So further down the letter that was sent to this office was a list of things that they were asking for. So it's important to realize that they had a risk assessment done in 2016, and that they were using this to submit as their proof. Now this was a little bit late, but these were the things that they were looking for and what they were looking at. I made it a little bit bigger on the screen here, but we have the risk analysis, the risk management plan, malicious software protection. So that's like your antivirus, firewalls, your safeguards, documentation of encryption. Where is data? Is the data that is where the data is being stored, is it encrypted? System activity review. We want to make sure that we are proactively monitoring our information systems, making sure that all users are legitimate, conducting legitimate business, and just being proactive on that front. And then they also wanted to see the breach notification. How did the office respond to the breach in terms of notifying the government and notifying the affected parties? So that's what they were looking for, and that's kind of where we base a lot of our risk analysis process around. So how do we be properly prepared? Well, we need to invest in a real relationship with an IT professional. Gone are the days of just having the IT guy come in, set you up, and then anytime something's down or broken, you just call them and they fix it, and then we're all good. No, we need to have a more ongoing, what's usually called a managed service provider relationship with our IT provider. And this is something that we'll also talk about later. Having them do your monitoring, your patching, your setup, all of these things is critically important to making sure that there are no vulnerabilities on your system. And then also having him monitor everything and set everything up, there has to be an investment in industry standard cybersecurity equipment, firewalls, antivirus, some of the new things like endpoint detection and response. We've talked about many of these things in previous webinars, and it's actually going to be a topic in our next webinar, that these are things that are now what used to be luxuries or going above and beyond the call of duty. It's now standard. It's if you're not doing it, you're not meeting up to standard. So we need to invest in your cybersecurity. It's the world we live in today. So you've invested you've invested money into your IT. You've retained your IT provider to have a much more hands-on relationship to handle backups, among other things. But you still get hacked. And you're like, well, what the heck? That's why the next main part of being properly prepared is the risk assessment. All of the documentation. If it's not documented, it's not done. If you have all these protections in place, but you fail to provide the documentation to the government, it's as if you didn't do it at all. And so what is really, really important is that documentation is basically a second cyber insurance policy. It is a way to get the government off of your back. And so we really want to re-emphasize that even with upgraded cybersecurity, hacks are still possible. So to be properly prepared, a real relationship with your IT professional, no matter how big nor how small your office may be, but also having that comprehensive risk assessment in place. That is your shield, and so we want to make sure that you have that. Now, one of the last things that we're going to talk about is third-party breaches. So one of the things that I failed to mention in our example of our client that had been breached is that they were actually not technically breached themselves, but rather one of their vendors that they were using who had access to their network was breached. And so that brings up a whole other list of issues of how do we make sure the people that we're working with aren't gonna get us in trouble. So in order to protect yourself, the main thing you need is a rock solid business associate agreement. This is a document, an agreement contract with any vendors that have access to your systems and information that they are going to abide by the laws to make sure that they are also cyber safe. So a few things that we want to make sure are in those business associate agreements so that you don't get screwed is that you want to make sure that they have proper language about notification and covering costs. We have seen examples where a vendor gets hacked and then they don't notify the covered entity, they don't notify the main entity that they have been hacked, and then they have sometimes language in there that says, oh, we will only cover up to 3 months of payment and in terms of reimbursing for breach costs. So if you pay them, for round numbers, if you pay them $1,000 a month, they may only give you $3,000 when that wouldn't even cover a quarter of your breach costs or of your notification costs, rather alone all of the costs that are associated with a breach. So you want to read those contracts and make sure that they are in your favor, not theirs. Another major aspect of these business associate agreements is due diligence. It is upon you as a covered entity to ensure that your business associates are doing everything that you're doing in terms of the risk assessment, the risk management plan, all of the cybersecurity implementations, that they're doing it themselves. And it is upon you to do your due diligence on them before you give them access to your data systems. So unfortunately, we are in an interconnected world. Most offices have many organizations that help them conduct operations, but you want to make sure that as you're secure, they're also secure, because again, even if they cause a hack, if you don't have that business associate agreement in place, if you're not doing your due diligence, that headache really spills onto you also. So we want to make sure that you don't have to go through that. So thank you. That is pretty much what we're going to talk about in terms of timeline of a breach. Again, the importance of having a security incident plan to mitigate the damages of these breaches is very, very important. So our next webinar, as we've been, kind of on a cybersecurity train lately, the last webinar we talked about all of the cybersecurity performance goals. We're not going to go into, how much does it cost, and tailor it more to a cost benefit analysis based on the size of your practice, based on how much information you have, what level of access others have. It's important to know what you need particularly and what will be the cost to your office, because it's hard to say all of these things about cybersecurity without really talking about the dollars and cents of it. So we want to make sure that your IT company watches this. So if you would mind forwarding this to your IT company so that they know from a HIPAA perspective what is standard, what is important in terms of being what we want to call HIPAA secure. So that webinar will be in 2 Thursdays from now. So Thursday, August 22nd at 12 o'clock Eastern. We will have, if you're watching this on YouTube, we will have the URL in the description for you to register. So with that, I always want to make sure that everyone knows about our different programs. HITECH Compliance Associates has been doing risk assessments for over 10 years now. When none of our clients, whenever they get hacked, they have never had a fine or had to enter a corrective action plan. The organization that we've been talking about as an example, they got no fine, no corrective action plan, and really mitigated a lot of the potential damages. So again, we have our basic HIPAA compliance kit, which gives you all the documentation that you need. But then we move into our insight program, where we work more with you as a compliance officer, as a service. And so we will actually, instead of just telling you what to do, we will actually help you implement some of the things and do some of the HIPAA homework that we like to call it. So if you're interested in any of that, please give an email to Michael McCoy at HIPAACK.com. His phone number is on the screen here. I am Joe McCoy. Thank you very much for attending. With HITECH Associates, a real person works with your practice to complete your HIPAA documentation. We are not selling a software program. We are your compliance partner. If you are interested in making sure your organization is protected before it is too late, please go to HIPAACompliancekit.com, linked below, to learn more about our services. We offer a free, no obligation, 30-minute consultation with your practice, and we'll send you a compliance report card based on that call. Thank you for watching. If you learned something, please like the video and share this video with your colleagues. Subscribe today to stay up to date on all things HIPAA.